All right, so today we're diving into an essay that basically turns what we thought we knew about evolution on its head. The argument is that for about 150 years, we've been looking at the picture with two fundamental pieces just missing.
We've all heard the phrase survival of the fittest, right? It's pretty much evolution 101. But what if that intense focus on competition, on who's the strongest individual, is really only telling half the story? The source material for this explainer argues that it misses the bigger and, honestly, the more incredible picture of how life actually works.
So before we get into the wild new ideas, let's just quickly set the scene. We're going to start with a familiar story, the classic Darwinian framework that you and I probably learned back in school.
Okay, so the traditional model basically has two main players. On one hand, you've got mutation. This is the creative engine, random little genetic tweaks that create all the variety. On the other hand, you've got competition. This is the filter, the classic survival of the fittest struggle, where the individuals with the best traits win. And this simple duo works perfectly for explaining how a single species gets better at something. How a cheetah gets faster, or how a giraffe's neck gets longer.
And that model is brilliant. It really is. But it starts to fall apart when you zoom out and look at the really big, complex stuff in nature. And that's where we're going next, to the puzzles that the traditional story has a really hard time explaining. I mean, just look at something like the nitrogen cycle. This isn't one animal getting better at hunting. This is a massive planet-wide machine that relies on tons of different species all playing their own unique part. How on earth does something like that evolve if it's all just about individual competition? Just check this out. You've got 5 totally different steps, and each one is handled by a completely different crew. First, one group of bacteria grabs nitrogen from the air. Then, a different group of bacteria takes that and changes it into something else. Then plants jump in and use it. It's like this incredible, perfectly timed relay race where the baton being passed is essential for all life on Earth. And here's the real kicker. You could sit there and mutate one little bacterium for 1 billion years, and you would never get a nitrogen cycle. Why? Because the cycle isn't a feature of any single organism. It's a property of the whole system. The magic isn't in the part, it's in the assembly. And that suggests we need another creative force. Okay, so if mutation isn't building these huge interconnected systems, then what is? This brings us to the first really big new idea from the essay, a whole second creative force in evolution. The author gives it a name, emergent assembly. And the idea is pretty straightforward. This is a creative force that works not by changing the individual pieces, but by figuring out new ways to put them together. It's all about combination, creating these new structures that can do things none of the individual parts could ever do on their own. This is a perfect example of how it works in the real world. You start with nothing but bare rock. Then lichens show up. They're the only things that can hang on. But as they live and die, they create the very first layer of soil. That new soil then makes it possible for mosses to move in. The mosses make the soil deeper, which then allows shrubs to take root. You see the pattern? Each stage literally builds the platform for the next one. And the key thing here? This has nothing to do with competition. The lichen isn't fighting the oak tree that's going to grow 2,000 years later. No, it's actually paving the way for it. An oak tree can't grow on bare rock, no matter how much you mutate it. The system had to be assembled first, piece by piece. That's emergent assembly. All right, so we've got a new creative force, emergent assembly. But creation is only half the story, right? You need a selective force to go with it. So what's the ultimate test of survival for these big assembled systems? And to explain this, the author uses this really fantastic analogy. Just picture this. Thousands of ships are all crossing a stormy ocean. And on board each one, there's a high-stakes chess tournament going on. So what really determines success here? Well, sure, there's individual competition, who's the best chess player on the boat, but there's a much bigger, more fundamental question: which ship is built well enough to even survive the storm? It doesn't matter if you're the greatest chess grandmaster in history if your ship is at the bottom of the ocean. And that is the second new force, structural selection. It's the filter that doesn't care how good the individual players are. It only cares about how well the stage is built. Over millions of years, the real test isn't just who wins the small battles, but which systems are robust enough to survive the big crises, the asteroid impacts, the ice ages. So now, let's put it all together. When you take these two new forces and you add them to the two we already knew, well, you get a completely rebalanced and, frankly, a much more complete picture of how life actually evolves.
This table just lays it out perfectly. You've got two levels of action, the individual and the system. At the individual level, you still have the classics, mutation creating new traits and competition sorting them out. But now, at the system level, you have emergent assembly creating new structures and structural selection deciding which of those structures are built to last. It's a full four-part story now.
And this isn't just about adding a couple new ideas. The author argues we've had the proportions all wrong. Look at this. The old view was that mutation did pretty much all the creative work, like 90%. The new view suggests that emergent assembly is actually the real powerhouse, responsible for maybe 60% of the new complex things we see in nature.
And when it comes to selection, the shift is even more dramatic. We used to think it was almost entirely about individual competition, but this model suggests that structural selection, whether the whole system survives a crisis, is way more important. It's the 70% factor. Because again, it doesn't matter how well you can compete if your entire ship goes down.
So what's the big takeaway from all this? Well, it's huge. It reframes evolution as being less about a constant war and more about finding a good fit. Cooperation is no longer this strange, rare exception we have to explain. It's a fundamental requirement for building anything that lasts. And all that waste in nature, like redundancy, it's not waste at all. The author calls it existence insurance. This completely flips our perspective. All that messy, beautiful, overlapping complexity in a rainforest, that isn't a bug. It's the most important feature. The systems that are generous, that have backups for their backups, those are the ones that actually survive over the long haul. They win because of their robustness, not in spite of it. The author of the essay sums up this entire idea with one killer line. The long game belongs not to the fiercest competitor, but to the most skillful assembler. It just perfectly captures the whole shift. The ultimate winners aren't just those who fight the best, but the systems that are built the best. And that's what I want to leave you with. With this new framework in your mind, the next time you look at a forest or a coral reef, what are you going to see? Will you see a brutal, never-ending battlefield? Or will you see an awe-inspiring masterpiece of assembly where life's true genius is in its incredible ability to build, connect, and endure together?